This is one of the coolest new cars you can buy in America today. It's the 717 horsepower BMW M5. But not just any M5, because this is the one enthusiasts have been clamoring for. This is the BMW M5 Wagon, the first time we've ever had a 5-door M5 in America. Nothing sets an enthusiast's loins on fire quite like a high-performance station wagon, or, to be honest, any high-performance 5-door vehicle, period, because they're supposed to be the perfect blend of practicality and performance. But controversially, I might even call this a 6-door because of this little door right here. And that hides the biggest controversy of all, the fact that this is the first ever BMW M5 plug-in hybrid. And as a result of that plug-in hybrid system, this has a curb weight of 5,500 pounds, or more than a 3-row Dodge Durango with 9,000 pounds of towing capability and a 6.4-liter cast iron V8 under its hood. This is by far the heaviest M5 that has ever existed. It's also the first time in M5 history that the power to weight ratio has gone in the wrong direction, and a new M5 has come out that's actually slower 0 to 60 than the previous M5. But I can't help thinking, is it still an M? And is it better than a BMW X5M, long the reason that we didn't have an M5 wagon in America? But before we get to that, we have to set the pricing stage, including the $2,600 gas guzzler tax. Yes, this is a plug-in hybrid with a gas guzzler tax. This will set you back $125,275. Although that is less than a BMW X5M. As tested here, you're looking at $145,775. So, I don't know, maybe in 20 years, I could afford to get one after it's been through 3 or 4 owners. In terms of design, I think the looks are definitely better than the X5M, and the hood is unquestionably longer, maybe about 50% longer than that SUV. Up front, we get a slightly less controversial version of BMW's kidney grille design. I know a lot of folks have been offended by the ever-growing kidneys and their newfound vertical stance. This is a little bit more demure, although it does have these LED light pipes surrounding it and some absolutely enormous cooling openings, because you need a lot of air to go inside to cool 717 horsepower. So much air that we don't even really have any grates between something out here and the radiators in there. There's even a radiator that's actually horizontal under there. So much cooling is needed. There's also ducts around here to help direct air around the vehicle, full LED headlights, of course, and it's difficult to see on camera, but the turn signals actually kind of pulse a little bit, which is a cool design. This right here is an astronomically large radar sensor, kind of bridging the two kidneys from one side to the other. Fun fact, BMW has never made a 7 Series wagon, but if I transported this back in time just about 2 or 3 years, I could probably convince a whole lot of people that BMW was finally planning a 7 Series wagon, because this is almost exactly the same length as a 2022 BMW 740i. It's 200.6 inches long, a whopping 5 inches longer than the last generation 5 Series. And that applies not just to the wagon, but also the sedan. And I will apologize in advance if I accidentally somehow call this an X5M instead of an M5. There's a lot of alphabet soup running around in my head right now. But clearly the reason to get this over the sedan is what's happening back here, because we get the cargo practicality of an SUV. Admittedly a small SUV, not quite X5, because back here we get 27.2 cubic feet of storage capacity, definitely more than we find in a regular 5 Series sedan. Now, the stretch is definitely part of the reason this is a whopping 1,100 pounds heavier than last M5, but more of the reason obviously is the plug-in hybrid system and the battery pack, which is innovatively packaged, I have to say. Much like we find in some plug-in hybrid Jeeps, they split the battery pack apart a bit because this is still rear-wheel drive with a mechanical drive shaft that has to come to the back. So the battery pack is placed half on the driver's side, more or less in this area under the driver's seat, and then half over there on the passenger side, more or less under that seat. That really does drop down the center of gravity. Now, as I've said before, center of gravity doesn't exactly compensate for curb weight, certainly not 5,500 pounds of curb weight, and neither quite does the tire situation, because these are narrower than I had expected them to be. I kind of thought when they said plug-in hybrid M5, I thought, ooh, that's kind of interesting. That'll have some insanely wide tires, sizes we maybe have never seen before. Instead, we get 285 40 ZR20s up front, 295s in the back. So not like 315s or 325s or anything like that. These are a grippy tire. It's a Michelin Pilot Sport tire, but maybe something even more aggressive would be nice, and something that does weigh kind of a lot. This isn't your grandparents' station wagon. There are no rear-facing seats in the back, and no one is going to mistake this for a mommy mobile with quad exhaust tips and that really loud V8 burble coming from the back. Of course, we have full LED taillights there, and we have a hatch that's reasonably practical. It doesn't open quite as high and quite as wide as some, but you'd have no problem as a taller person here because it actually opens kind of away from the bumper itself. The bumper does stick out a bit, and that could make loading or unloading cargo a little bit trickier than some of the other wagons out there. But there are fewer wagons than ever before because even Volvo has decided to step back from the wagon game. While we're back here, we should talk cargo capacity. I was able to squeeze 6 24-inch roller bags back here, and you might be able to squeeze an additional small roller bag as well. That's a pretty impressive showing, but it did require some roller bag Tetris because the hinges, as you can see here, do occupy some of the ceiling space, and that means some of those taller items, you really have to Tetris them to get them to actually fit inside. I'm really glad BMW put the batteries under the body rather than in the cargo area because it gives us a small amount of storage space back here, but importantly, it also keeps the rear end from being overly heavy. Now to the hybrid section, or as one of my friends put it, the segment where I'm going to talk about the abomination under the hood. To be clear, that's not how I feel about this hybrid system, but I can understand why some M owners disagree. At its heart is a familiar 4.4-liter V8, twin turbo, of course, producing 577 horsepower. That is mated to an electric motor to bring the total up to 717 horsepower total. That motor is good for quite a lot of torque. It can actually send 332 pound-feet of torque direct to that ZF 8-speed automatic transmission. And it is a regular ZF 8-speed, so it's not some sort of funky newfangled transmission. They don't stick motors in the rear differential unit like we find in some AMG models, although I think that is kind of cool too. And everything is powered by a 22.1 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. The capacity in the US, it's, according to the spec sheet, 14.8 kilowatt hours, although I suspect it may actually be slightly more. In Europe, it's 18.6 because the battery warranty is a little bit different. And we need to talk about Europe, because Europe is the prime reason that we have a plug-in hybrid M5. In Europe, over 60% of cars are company cars. They're purchased by companies as an employee benefit for their employees. That number in the US, way under 1%. In Europe, there are also emissions target requirements and some extra incentives for companies to buy electrified vehicles for their company car programs, plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. That has a lot to do with what's going on under this hood. Now, whether or not you're interested in that, I will leave that up to you, but the result of this is a vehicle that gives us, according to the EPA, 25 miles of electric range, 13 miles per gallon, which is why we have that gas guzzler tax. But in reality, we've been getting better fuel economy than that, right around 15, and much better EV range than that as well, about 30 miles of EV range. Not that anybody's going to be buying an M5 wagon for the EV range, at least not here. Although if you are, you'll be happy to know that not only is the range longer than expected, we also get faster charging than originally announced. They decided to put an 11.5 kilowatt onboard AC charger, which means you'll get all 30 miles of range back in about 2 hours, as long as you have access to the right charger. This is intriguingly one of the fastest charging plug-in hybrids available in the US, and certainly one of the most powerful as well. Clearly what we need to do now is get this out on the road and talk about how this hybrid system comes together. It's interesting that when you turn on the vehicle, when the battery is charged, it doesn't default to electric mode. It defaults to the hybrid mode, where it is going to prioritize power coming out of the battery, but not as much as in the electric-only operation mode. Well, electric-only in air quotes, because if you romp on the throttle, it is going to turn on the gasoline engine in any of the drive modes, just as you'd expect out of a BMW M product. And that's because in electric mode, we do get a reasonable amount of torque, over 300 pound-feet of torque, which is certainly enough to hill climb like this and go nearly 90 miles an hour in electric mode, but really it's here just to help that gasoline engine. And in order to get 300 pound-feet of torque and 200 horsepower out of an electric motor, you need a reasonably large capacity battery pack, unless you're using a really, really expensive battery like we find in some of those plug-in hybrid AMG models. But those actually seem a little bit sillier than this because the actual usable range is so impossibly low that then it really does seem kind of like a silly proposition. Here, we have an honest-to-goodness 25 to 30 miles of EV driving range, and in my testing, we almost always got 30 miles out of this battery. So it's EPA rated for 25, know that it's actually a little bit more useful than that. Now that we're out of the fog, we can dig a little bit deeper into the throttle in hybrid mode, and that's where the gasoline engine is going to roar to life. And in this mode, we ran 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. So not quite as fast as the last M5, but still certainly very, very impressive. Also impressive, in our 60 to 0 stopping test, 106 feet is what it took this model to stop. Now, we do have the Pilot Sport tires on this model, and there are a few different tires available depending on where you're buying your M5 around the world. These are probably the grippiest tires available, but I am surprised they're not a little bit wider. We have 285 with tires up front, 295 with tires in the back, and for something that weighs this much, I had kind of expected those tires to be a little bit wider. And that's why the stopping distance is going to be longer than the last M5, whether we're talking about 60 to 0, 70 to 0, or if you're out on a track, 100 miles an hour to 0, you really are going to notice things stretching out there. And you're going to notice the weight when it comes to handling. Although I think BMW did a fantastic job with this. The steering is nice. It doesn't feel as heavy as you might think on first glance, especially if the road is relatively tight like this. It really hugs the corners really, really nicely. The problem is if you start going a little bit faster, or the road is not exactly well paved like the road that we're on here, you will start to notice the extra weight in the M5. This is no lightweight vehicle, and the limits are really high, and that's kind of what makes the M5 challenging a bit, is that the limits are so high that you might find yourself getting in a little over your head, and with this much curb weight, you know, there's going to be fewer opportunities, let's just say, to try and save it. As far as handling goes, obviously I have to give this an A. What are we comparing this against? We're comparing this against something like an X5M. That definitely has a higher center of gravity. Thanks to the battery position, we don't have a lot of weight hanging out in the back like we find in some plug-in hybrids where they put the battery back there in the trunk. It's instead low, almost skateboard-like under the front seats. It's a really clever packaging there. It actually reminds me of some of the plug-in hybrid SUVs that we see out there, of course, compressed into a sport vehicle like this, where those batteries actually help improve that center of gravity a bit. But there's no denying the curb weight increase. There's also no denying the curb weight increase when it comes to the ride quality. We've got 5,500 pounds here and relatively little suspension motion to damp those 5,500 pounds. So this is very, very firm. It is adaptive, and right now we are in the softest mode. If I go to a more aggressive drive mode, it's just too firm for my tastes. So I think I would spend my entire time in comfort or in the middle mode. The more aggressive modes, again, they're really left to personal preference, but we can experience that here. I'll put this in Sport Plus, and here we're definitely feeling every little pebble in this road. Every freeway expansion joint, every little spider crack in the pavement, that's all coming through into the cabin. And interestingly, it doesn't actually improve the handling capability that much. Unless maybe you're out on a track, something like that, then maybe you might see a bit of a difference, but out here on this road surface, I just don't find any reason to actually use that more aggressive suspension mode. And that's partially because this handles so insanely well. This is one of a very limited number of vehicles where I've been able to make myself car sick while driving this car, especially if I'm trying to talk to a camera. This is actually take 2 because I found myself getting a little bit nauseous earlier and I had to slow down a little bit while I'm trying to balance things out here. This is just so much impossible fun to drive. But ride quality, that's certainly going to be a C-. Cabin noise, that's also a bit of a problem. You're probably hearing this on camera. There is a lot of road noise coming into this cabin. We measured 69.5 to 70 decibels out on the road, making this one of the louder vehicles that we've tested recently. Actually, this is kind of in contention with some cargo vans. And that did surprise me because, again, these tires are not the widest. 285s up front, 295s in the rear. And they're also not inflated that high. Looks like right now we've got about 32 PSI up front, 36 PSI in the rear. It's about what the door sticker says they should be. But we're certainly getting a lot of thump, thump, thump into the cabin, a lot of low-end rumble coming into the cabin, especially out on some of those rougher road surfaces that pretty much everybody's gonna be driving on daily, you're definitely going to notice that this is a lot louder in the cabin, but it is so much fun. And I love the fact that they give us the option to go back to rear wheel drive, but you can only do that with the stability control off here, or in at least the limited mode as it's telling us here. And that is a bit of a bummer, because if you want to launch this well, you have to be in the regular four-wheel drive mode. That's where you're going to get the 3.3 second 0 to 60. I did test it with the stability control off in the two-wheel drive mode. The best 0 to 60 time I could get was almost a full second longer at 4.2 seconds, because there's just so much tire spinning in the back. Now, it's unquestionably a lot of fun, it's just not going to get you quicker 0 to 60. Efficiency is certainly not the goal of this hybrid system, but nevertheless I have been impressed with it. Over a week of mixed driving, treating this as a hybrid, not plugging it in, we averaged 15 miles per gallon. That may not sound too impressive until you consider the 13 mpg that the EPA has rated this system for, so it is a reasonable improvement. And then of course the fact that we have over 700 horsepower here. I can't think of anything that produces this much power that is this efficient and runs on gasoline. Now, in electric mode, it's also been surprisingly efficient with longer range than I had expected. Now, when we plugged this in to charge it, and the battery was at 0 according to the range-o-meter there, it consumed almost 17 kilowatt hours. That was surprising because the usable capacity in the US is supposed to be under 15 kilowatt hours. Now, obviously the charger is consuming some energy because it's not 100% efficient, and the cooling systems are using some energy as well, but it would be unusual if they used that much energy. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that maybe more of this battery is actually unlocked to us than the spec sheet would indicate. And perhaps that's why we've been able to get 30 miles of EV range really pretty easily on the days that we were able to charge this. Again, not exactly the mission of this kind of drivetrain, but still relatively impressive numbers for the kind of system that we have here. The reason, of course, for the big battery is because they wanted to be able to power a big motor. And the reason for that is that in Europe, there are certainly some incentives for plug-in hybrid vehicles. The company car thing is a little out of control in Europe, and the way that all combines together is there's an incentive for plug-in hybrids, even plug-in hybrids like this. And in the United States, if you want the extra power, you want to sort of greenwash your performance vehicle, then, you know, get a plug-in hybrid. There is going to be some real-world improvement. If you are the kind of person that wants to plug in your vehicle, you could do your daily commute pretty reasonably here in electric-only mode. And it is still an awful lot of fun. On this road here, we've been in electric-only mode the vast majority of the time, and this road is so tight and so winding that honestly, you wouldn't be able to exercise much more than, you know, the 300 and something pound-feet of torque and 200 horsepower-ish that this motor is putting out, and you can have an awful lot of fun. I also appreciate the fact that it is still going through the same rear-wheel biased four-wheel drive system or all-wheel drive system as the gasoline engine, so it retains the same feel that it has when it's in its hybrid mode. Next, I'm going to go into the M hybrid screen and choose dynamic. That's going to turn that dial up to 11. It's going to turn the gasoline engine on, basically keep it on most or all the time. I haven't actually seen it turn off here. And then it's going to use the electric motor kind of like an electric supercharger. It's going to use it to reduce or eliminate turbo lag. We do have a pretty decent amount of power coming from this engine, nearly 600 horsepower just from the engine. And even though we have a 4.4 liter engine, we're still going to get some turbo lag. Well, not with this electric motor, because you come around a corner, you romp on the throttle, you can really feel that electric motor pulling. The linear nature of that torque delivery is really, really fun. And that's when this really starts to dance. That's when you start thinking to yourself, is it really 5,500 pounds? Of course, you go into a corner a little too fast and then you're reminded, yep, it is 5,500 pounds. At 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, I find the front seats to be very comfortable. We have a power adjustable tilt telescopic steering column, memory linked, of course, to the 2-position memory on the door. The passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat, but you should know that even though the bolsters are inflatable, they are pretty aggressive, and if you're much wider than I am, you might find the seats a little bit constricting. Taller people, you might want to keep in mind where the shoulder bolsters are. Those could be a little bit confining as well. If you frequently have adults, taller children, or of course child seats in the back, keep in mind the shape of the front seats. It effectively limits especially knee room back here in the rear. This front seat was comfortably adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. I only have about 2 inches of leg room or knee room left there. And over on this side, I did have to move my front seat further forward than I would normally like in order to fit a rear-facing child seat behind. You will find a little bit more real-world room in something like an Audi RS6, but this is actually kind of similar to a Mercedes-Benz E-Class wagon. There's a pretty decent hump in the middle, but headroom is actually pretty generous. Even though we have the big panoramic moonroof in this model, I have maybe about 2 inches of headroom left. So definitely better than we find in the average midsize luxury sedan, but not quite as practical as that X5M. On the child seat anchor front, we have latch or ISOFIX anchors for each of the outboard seat positions, but they're behind these plastic doors like we find in other BMW models. These are easy to break, hard to replace, and hard to take off, so you could try and store them somewhere for later. The rear seat bottom cushion is on the long side, but I had no problem with the load leg on this particular Kleck base station because the way that the floor pan and the battery is located doesn't actually cause any issue in that section of the footwell. Other than that, installing a base station was actually pretty easy, and you shouldn't have a problem with some of those larger rear-facing child seats as long as you're my height or shorter. The M5's interior should be familiar if you've been inside any BMW product lately. We have our controls for our power sunshade here. We have a big panoramic moonroof, but it does not open, so we just have that powered shade control right there. Alcantara headliner there. We have Alcantara wrapped sun visors. They don't extend though, something I am surprised about. The other thing I'm a little bit surprised about is that we don't have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, but we do have that attractive M stitching right there, that distinctive little stripe there in that. We also have what looks like a fixed in place head restraint, but it actually is height adjustable. We have the M5 logo there and extreme bolstering. These are actually quite comfortable seats, but if you're a large framed person, you might find your shoulders a little bit restricted. For my body shape though, and my size, I found these to be extremely comfortable. And I kind of like this sort of blue-green theme going on here. It is almost iridescent in the sunlight. We get matching piping and matching stitching here. And again, aggressive bolsters on the midsection of the seat there, and of course that seat bottom cushion as well. We have an extending thigh cushion down there that is powered. And if we move on over to the doors, of course, we find mostly soft touch materials. We have soft touch slush molded plastics down there at the bottom. You can see the ambient lighting currently in purple right there around that grab handle for the door. Stitched leather right there. Of course, soft touch materials in the upper section of the door as well. I have to admit that I kept grabbing in the wrong place for a door handle. Somehow I expected it to be here, but it is actually right there. I like the design and the look, but for some reason passengers kept grabbing the wrong area for a handle as well. We have the same sort of ambient lighting technology here that we find in other BMWs, where we have a changeable color strip running under these plastic panels. So the color is adjustable as is the brightness. They are a little bit redder on camera than they are in person. In this color mode, it's really quite a solid purple. We have the Bowers & Wilkins speaker grills there, some buttons for the seat, so memory controls for the passenger seat, and a button to take you over to the infotainment system where you could see those seat adjustments earlier. Obviously, lots of soft touch materials on the dashboard, carbon fiber, etc., and some really interesting air vents. Let me show you how these work here. So we have a digital control for opening and closing the air vent. We have a slider right there. You can see a little LED following along, and then the air vent is actually in this area split between that purple panel, so there, and then we control it with this little digital knob right here, and that directs air around that vent. Very similar to what's going on inside, say, a modern Tesla, only we have this physical control rather than touching on the screen for where you want to go. We then have some additional touch buttons right there in the middle of everything. Then we have BMW's 2-screen infotainment setup, where we have the instrument cluster over here, main infotainment system over here. Of course, it offers Apple CarPlay support right there, as you can see, smartphone integration, Waze, etc. The native software is very familiar if you've been inside any recent BMW model before. We have controls for the heated seats, the ventilated seats right there, etc. Lots of installable apps in the system. I appreciate how they pull out some of these apps. So for instance, we have Maps in Apple CarPlay. If I click that, it's actually going to take you right there over to the Map app on your smartphone. That's kind of handy. Same thing goes for, Electrify America, etc. Now, we should talk about the M mode settings, because if I press the button that you're going to see in a bit, we have some different controls over the drive mode there, including charging. We can also click this setup button, and we have a million different ways you can configure your M5. Drivetrain, energy recovery, the drive logic, chassis steering, braking, the X drive, even the M sound, whether you want it to be louder out the back, etc. That's all adjustable as well. Now, going down the center console, we have Qi charging mat right there, a place to put another smartphone, but it's not a charger. 2 cup holders there. You can see we have a USB cable here. If you want to plug your phone in to charge, we have 2 USB charge ports right there. Wireless CarPlay is standard here. Wired CarPlay is not offered, so that's just a charge cable right there. Down here we have the toggle shifter, parking brake right there, auto brake hold here. We have our start-stop button right over there, and then we have our control knob for the infotainment system. These buttons relate to the M modes and their various setup procedures there. We have a roller style control for the volume, and then a split armrest and storage area there. Relatively shallow storage compartment inside. Logical, of course, because of where the transmission and all-wheel drive system is located right under there. Now, moving over to the instrument cluster, there are a bunch of different instrument cluster modes. We have an augmented reality mode with the forward-looking camera. There's also a head-up display right there. And then, of course, the really comfortable BMW M steering wheel. This is one of my favorite steering wheels really in anything. I like the fact that they didn't go all weird and give it a flat top. It's a regular flat bottom, roundish steering wheel. Aggressive sport grips, really, really thick wrapping there on the side, and then more of a traditional steering wheel diameter on top. There's the contrasting stitching we've seen in other M products before. Paddle shifters, of course, on the back. This one says boost because you can pull it for a boost mode, operable over about 20 miles an hour or so. We have the M buttons, M1 and M2. Those are shortcut buttons to engage certain different vehicle settings that you can configure over there in the infotainment system. Controls over here for the cruise control system, controls over here for the head-up display, and that instrument cluster, also volume up, down, and then this is effectively track forward, backward when you're not interacting with that system. Bottom lining the M5 is pretty easy. Unless you really want the sedan format, the M5 Wagon is simply better if you're already M shopping. It is going to cost you a hair more, but it's not that big of a deal when we're already talking about something that starts at $125,000. Well, $125,175 to be specific for that sedan. The Wagon is $127,675. If you're already blown over $100,000 on your M, just go ahead and get the Wagon. It's simply better in every respect. It doesn't handle or drive or do really anything that differently than the sedan, except that it has a more practical back seat and a better cargo area in the back. Now, as far as cross shops and competitors go, there's really just one in the US right now. It's the one we haven't spoken much about yet, and that is the Audi RS6 Avant. I recently drove that. It is absolutely fantastic. It's $132,590 starting, so a little bit more expensive, but you can basically get these up to astronomical price tags, both of them, because of options and different paint colors, etc. There's a lot of customization available on these. Now, at the moment, there is nothing from Mercedes that would directly compete with this, because we don't have an E63 wagon. We do have an E53, but it's absolutely not the same sort of thing. It is, however, significantly more affordable, and it might be the one that maybe I could sell one kidney for and get, but to get an M5, I might need to sell both of them. That would be problematic future. But I've gotten off topic here. We do expect to see an AMG version of the E-Class, whether or not there's a wagon at some point in the future. There probably will be for Europe. Whether we'll get it or not, that remains to be seen. Probably it depends on the general sales of the M5 and RS6 Avant to be sure, but it probably will come from Mercedes. They have done this in the past. Now, exactly what we're going to get in an upgraded E63, or are they going to renumber it? We don't know there either. That is unclear. The rumors have pointed to a turbocharged V8 plug-in hybrid system somewhat similar to what we find in the M5, but again, details are incredibly scarce at this moment in time. Remember that if it's going to be sold in Europe as well as North America, that's why we have the plug-in hybrids, because of the way these vehicles are treated tax-wise in Europe and some of the incentives for company-owned vehicles. And a lot of these are company-owned vehicles in Europe. Over 60% of new cars are company-owned currently in especially key markets like Germany. And when we're talking about this kind of vehicle, that number just grows and grows and grows. So that's why we see plug-in hybrids here. at any rate, if I had $150,000 magically burning a hole in my pocket, I would buy the M5 Wagon over the Audi RS6, but it is a really close call. And here's sort of why. Yes, the M5 is heavier than the RS6, and notably heavier than that at a few hundred pounds heavier, but it's somehow a little bit more playful. You get the rear-wheel drive mode, which we don't get in the Audi. I've always been surprised that Audi hasn't given that a whirl in some of their models. Maybe it's because they're a little bit more front-heavy, and you will notice that front-heavy nature of the Audi. Now, I don't think it's a problem, but it is something you'll notice. And the reason for that is, in Audi's classic Quattro systems, the RS6, the A4, A5, etc., it's because the engine is entirely in front of the front axle and a portion of the transmission is in front of the front axle as well. That's because the front axle, the transfer case, and the transmission are all jammed into the same case. And the only way to make that work is for the engine to be hanging out in front of the front wheels. So the bigger and the heavier the engine, the more you will notice that weight hanging out there in front of the vehicle. If it's a small 4-cylinder engine, it's not as big of a deal as a larger 4-liter V8, for instance, hanging out entirely in front of the front axle. It also changes the look of the vehicle because you tend to have that longer front overhang with the front tires and front wheels tucked a little bit closer to the front passenger compartment than we find in, say, the BMW or the Mercedes. Now, again, I don't know if I really find that to be a problem, but it is something you'll notice. The BMW will feel a little bit more, nimble's not quite the right word, but maybe a little bit more traditional, a little bit more playful. Now, as far as general handling considerations go, the RS6 seems to have better grip. And I think the feel is a little bit more traditional in the Audi as well, even though it has an air suspension, which is somewhat surprising, and we have a regular steel spring suspension in the BMW. I think that just has to do with the curb weight. However, the way the BMW feels is a bit more my cup of tea. It feels heavier. It feels maybe a bit more muscle car. I don't know if that's exactly what BMW was going for, but that's definitely the impression that I got with it this week. The other thing I really got this week is the fuel economy when it's operating as a hybrid is definitely below a lot of the competition. The EPA rating of 13 mpg is just impossibly low. Yes, we did out-index that in our real-world tests, but you'll also out-index it in an Audi RS6 Avant. The RS6 Avant gets a 17 mile per gallon combined EPA score that is significantly better. So if you truly do not ever plan on plugging your BMW in, know that the M5's plug-in hybrid system will still work. In fact, it's still going to be charging that battery on a regular basis. It needs that power to make the M5 do what the M5 can do. Of course, you're going to get the most benefit out of the system if you plug it in as far as fuel economy, but you don't need to as far as the performance benefit. If you're in the right drive mode, it's going to maintain the battery state of charge, absolutely no problem. Don't worry about it. It's not that kind of plug-in hybrid vehicle where if you don't ever plug it in, it's useless to you. This is still useful with air quotes. They're big, big, big air quotes. But if you never plan on plugging it in, logically they could have done something very similar with a battery that was maybe half this size and just had a high power dissipation rate and a high recharge rate. That's not the direction they went in. However, because of the way Europe's laws are working right now and that incentive for those tax benefits there, I would not be surprised if pretty much all the competition over time turned into this same kind of plug-in hybrid system. It's not ideal for North American customers. Again, something lighter weight, something hybridized only, I think would have been more logical, but that's not the world that we live in. And the world that we live in is the one that we're here right now with, and that's where I would probably get an M5. Anyway, let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And are you interested in, of course, this kind of vehicle or not? I think that the plug-in hybrid wagons make kind of more sense than the sedans just due to the extra room that we have on board to compensate for that battery pack location. But, I just don't know if that many M5 owners are really going to be plugging in all the time. See all of you next week.